Good evening, and welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, March 11th, 2015. The meeting is now called to order. I am substituting tonight for Chair Birch. Mr. Paulson, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Kane?
Present.
Commissioner Erekson?
Here.
Commissioner Hanssen?
Here.
Commissioner Talasfor?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
And Vice Chair Benami.
Here. I would ask that everybody please join Commissioner Talasfor in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Town of Los Gatos strongly encourages active participation in the public process. Written comments concerning agenda items are welcome and helpful, and they may be submitted to staff prior to a meeting. At meetings of the Commission, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. During verbal communications, an individual may speak on any item not on the agenda, and any member of the public may speak during the public hearing of an agenda item. If you wish to speak during verbal communications or during consideration of an agenda item, please complete a speaker card located behind the bench for where you are seated and hand them to a staff member seated to my right. Print your name clearly, and if you think I'll need help in pronouncing your name, please print it phonetically as it is pronounced. Cards can be, again, submitted to staff to my right. You're allowed 3 minutes to speak, so keep your comments brief and concise. And turn off your cell phone so we don't hear your ringtones. Minutes for the February 11th, 2015 meeting of the Commission were distributed in the packet for this evening's meeting. Are there any corrections or additions for the minutes? Commissioner Erekson.
So I appreciate the staff thinking that I can both make a motion and second a motion, but I don't actually remember whether I made the motion or seconded the motion or did neither to approve the minutes of February 11th, but somebody else probably either made the motion or seconded the motion. So
Staff will make that correction.
All right. May I have a motion to, Commissioner O'Donnell?
No, I was going to make a motion. As amended, I would move to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Kane?
Seconded.
Minutes are approved. Do we have a vote? Now they're approved. All right. We've received a desk item for item number 3. Have the commissioners had an opportunity to read the correspondence?
Yes.
Are there any requested continuances this evening? I see none. In addition to their service on the Planning Commission, members of the Commission serve on town subcommittees. Are there any reports tonight? Commissioner Hanssen?
Commissioner Erekson, Commissioner Talasfor, and I all sit on the Housing Element Advisory Board, and we met last week to finalize our recommendation on the housing element to forward it onto the Planning Commission and then the Town Council for approval. And we had quite a bit of discussion about the draft element, but ultimately it was approved and it will be sent on to the Planning Commission for approval and then the Town Council. It's on a fairly tight time frame from what I can see because the actual deadline was originally January 31st and there's a 120-day grace period, so it'll come to the Planning Commission in April and go to Town Council in May from what we were told.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanssen. We're moving on to verbal communications. If you wish to speak tonight during verbal communications or during consideration of an agenda item, again, please complete a speaker card. I don't believe we have any speaker cards for items not on the agenda. So we will move to item number 1. And this is the public hearing portion of our agenda to consider an appeal of the Development Review Committee. A decision approving architecture and site application S-14-072, construction of a single-family residence at 15343 Santella Court on property zoned HR 2.5 PD. May I have a show of hands from the commissioners who have visited the site? Are there any disclosures by any of the commissioners for this item? Seeing none. Ms. Moseley, I understand you'll be giving the staff report tonight?
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. The subject property is Lot 7 within the development known as the Highlands of Los Gatos, which is a 19-lot planned development that was approved by the Town Council in 2005. All the lots within the development are being completed by David on Homes. The application for Lot 7 includes a 2-story residence, which is single-story from Santella Court and 2 stories at the rear of the residence. The main or upper floor of the residence contains 4,262 square feet of living floor area and 712 square feet of garage. The lower floor of the residence has 3,009 square feet of cellar and 425 square feet of qualifying living floor area. The plans were reviewed by the town's consulting architect and found to be well designed with high-quality materials and details. The plans were also reviewed twice by the town's consulting arborist, initially prior to the design of the residence, and then again during the review of the development plans. The majority of the trees within the building envelope are of poor or fair poor condition, and the arborist did not find the trees to be of a quality to consider redesigning the residence to retain. The plans were deemed complete and scheduled for a public hearing on January 13th of this year through the Development Review Committee. The appellant, Mr. Weissman, was present for the meeting and voiced his concerns regarding the oak trees proposed for removal and the visibility of the residence from the valley floor. After discussing the neighbors' concerns, the DRC found that the application was in compliance with the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines and the approved PD ordinance, and that the proposed residence was in the most appropriate location on the site considering its constraints, and the DRC approved the application. Later that day, Mr. Weissman appealed the DRC's decision based on his concerns. The applicant has provided documentation and exhibits as to why they cannot relocate the residence. They are provided in Exhibit 8 within your staff report. While the town While the town understands Mr. Weissman's concerns, the project is in compliance with the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines, the Hillside Specific Plan, and the PD Ordinance. The proposed residence is well-designed and is an appropriate size for the lot and would be compatible with the surrounding homes in the Highland development. And while the siting of the house solely to the western edge of the property is potentially feasible, the impacts of grading, visibility, and architecture would be significant. And as such, staff recommends that the appeal be denied and the application approved, subject to the attached conditions. This completes staff's report. We are here if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Moseley. Are there questions of staff from the commissioners at this time? Commissioner Kane.
Thank you for your report. On page 5, under tree impacts, you mentioned that there's 26 trees on the site. 7 are proposed to be removed and 8 may be impacted by construction, so that's 15 out of the 26. Ms. Moseley, how many trees will be replanted on that site, given that 7 are coming out and 8 are being, I don't know what 8 are being, adversely impacted? What does it mean that they're being impacted? The root system will be affected?
It means that the arborist considered the potential impacts and has either provided mitigation to reduce that impact, but obviously there's no way to fully reduce it and remove any impacts. They aren't proposing to remove those additional 8 trees at this time. They are proposing to do everything they can to save those trees.
So then, specific to the 7, how many trees will be planted on this site to replace those 7?
I'd have to do a little bit of math based on the canopy replacement, but it would be based on the town code requirements for canopy replacement.
So it'd likely be a number equal to or greater than 7?
Correct,
And it'll be on site?
Yes.
And if the other 8 trees were impacted over time and died, we would apply the same math to the replacement of those trees?
I'm not clear as far as whether or not the town arborist requires canopy replacement for dead trees if they were to remove them in the future based on health, and that the arborist would determine that they're actually dead. But if they were to be removed as part of this project, or in direct correlation with the construction work, then they would be required to do canopy replacement.
Thank you. My last question, if I may. How do we monitor all of that, immediate to the development, and then over time? Do we make visits? How do we monitor those two questions?
So any protected tree is required to receive a tree removal permit in order to remove it, no matter the health of it. They would have to go through the Parks and Public Works Department in order to obtain a tree removal permit.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hanssen?
I had the same concern as Commissioner Kane, and I just wanted to ask one more question. So just take, for instance, the trees that are near the site that aren't targeted to be removed. I know that if the tree ends up dying, they end up getting a tree removal permit, but it seems like if that's caused by the construction, I wouldn't think that, what happens in that circumstance? Wouldn't they treat that like a tree that they targeted for removal with a required replacement?
So the town arborist would review the tree, the condition of the tree, based on the time of submittal. So the arborist would understand that this development, maybe 15 years down the road, I can't speak to whether the arborist would have the same review as, but anything in the next year or two that would be directly associated with impacts of this development would be associated with the construction, and they'd be required to do canopy replacement.
And related to that, how often during the development process is the arborist supposed to visit?
The town arborist gets involved in the application for the tree removal permit, and then the staff planner is responsible for doing a final inspection to ascertain that all the trees that were supposed to be retained are retained, and that any required plantings are in place prior to final inspection.
So what you're saying is the arborist won't be checking during the construction process?
The arborist is not responsible for checking of health of existing trees.
Even if they're potentially going to be damaged by the construction?
Correct. That is not a role of the town arborist at this time.
Any further questions from commissioners? Thank you, Ms. Moseley. We will now open the public portion of the public hearing and allow the appellant 5 minutes to address the commission. Dr. Wiseman, you have 5 minutes, and I need you to fill out a speaker card. Thank you.
Dave Weissman, Francis Oaks. To answer your question, Commissioner Kane, the applicant in his application, those 7 trees will be replaced by 6 new trees, and in lieu fees will be paid for 17 trees. It's not even a one-to-one. I appealed the DRC vote because I find their decision inconsistent with both the town's hillside development standards for visibility and tree protection, and this application should be rejected in its present form. To start with, the issue of visibility. As for discussion's sake, let's for the moment put aside those overreaching objectives stated in various pages of the hillside standards that specifically say, 1, maintain the natural appearance of the hillside from all vantage points, including the valley floor. Minimize changes to the visual quality of the hillsides. Ensure that development does not dominate, but rather visually blends and achieves harmony between the natural and built environment. Visual impacts of buildings should be mitigated to the greatest extent reasonable by reducing the height of the building and moving the structures to another location on the site, and sustainability. So the applicant has now been kind enough to supply us with visual analysis, something that was surprisingly not available at the DRC meeting. It appears to me from the photos in Exhibit 11, Part 2, that the calculated visibility of this proposed house only that portion visible to someone standing on the exact corner of Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill Road was used. Even then, it involves looking through a narrow visibility tunnel created by a palm tree and 2 redwood trees on the left side and the Chevron gas station on the right side. I can only say that this appears to me to be the case because there is no explanation as to how these calculations were done. Seriously, is this what the applicant thinks the Hillside Standard Committee intended? That one looks between 3 planted plants and a gas station building to assess visibility? I think the public, myself included, and staff who spent many, many hours drafting the Hillside Standards deserve more credit. But I can understand trying to put this spin on this issue because if one uses common sense and walks 60 steps to the south along Los Gatos Boulevard, one now has a totally unobstructed view of the story poles on Lot 7. And I might add, of the completed, totally visible and occupied house next door on Lot 6, also for which no visibility analysis was done. The Hillside Development Standards do not say that the viewing platform is literally and absolutely at the intersection. Common sense is important. But there are other issues here. The primary photo was taken on February 2nd, 2015, well after the deciduous oaks on the property started to leaf out and provide more screening. Such an analysis needs to be done in December when the deciduous oaks are bare. Screening is only considered when accompanied by trees in the immediate neighborhood, not trees a half a mile away from the site, and certainly not a gas station. It is impossible to accurately assess what parts of a constructed house would be seen through the nearby trees, since only the outline of the orange netting is visible at such a distance. The Hillside Development Standards, page 13, emphatically say that potential visibility is defined as capable of being seen from a viewing platform if trees or large shrubs are removed, significantly pruned, or impacted by construction. I will have more to say about tree impacts from construction later. And perhaps most importantly, the Hillside Development Standards specifically note on page 6 that property owners must recognize and respect the constraints associated with hillside development. In other words, fit the house to the lot and not vice versa. I am not asking you to deny any house on this lot because I have a win-win solution. There is some 50 feet of the same gradual slope as indicated by the topography lines, to the west of the proposed house into which part of a reduced size house could be moved. That area is already treeless. To say, as Mr. Abbs has done in Exhibit 11, that a smaller house is not compatible with the neighborhood is almost Orwellian. Very telling is his comment that such changes as I have proposed would limit the ability to capture views from desired living spaces. But that is the whole point of decreasing visibility. Alternatively, the applicant could leave the house where it is and reduce its height,
Dr.
size,
Weissman?
and changing its orientation.
Your time is up. Thank you. Do any commissioners have questions of Dr. Weissman? Commissioner Kane.
So as you were speaking, Dr. Weissman, I turned to the section on visibility, and it gives specific viewing platforms. With all due respect, it doesn't say go 30 yards south. The people who put it together, and you were there at the time, picked out 4 spots. So there was a level playing field. And I went to the spot and I saw the pictures, and they say it's 21%. I didn't go 30 yards to the south. In terms of our standards and guidelines, what would it mean if I did? It's not one of the viewing spots that I'm told to pay attention to.
When those viewing platforms were brought up in the committee, I don't think any of us, certainly in the public, went out and actually looked at the site. I think we accepted that staff went out, looked at the visibility, and said, this looks reasonable. I think when you've got 3 trees on the left side and a gas station, and you're looking through a narrow little area, it makes, yes, the visibility from that very point is limited. But if you walk 30 feet to the right or across the street, the whole house on Lot 7 and Lot 6 are visible. That only makes sense to me. It doesn't say that, we're within three inches of that corner.
I do not disagree.
I
And-
understand
And maybe going forward, we need to revisit some of the conditions that could have been overgrown, in fact, and ruin the visitation sites, but visualization sites. But right now, this is what I have. And I don't know how the other commissioners feel. I feel constrained by what's here. I understand what you're saying.
Then go with common sense.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Dr. Weissman. I will now call the applicant, Steve Abbs, representing David on Homes, and you have 5 minutes.
My name's Jeff Thayer, and I'm Vice President of David on Homes Land Acquisition Development. I am going to, Steve's coming up next, but I wanted to give just a quick run through what we're going to do. I'm going to take about 30 seconds here. Tonight we've got Carl Lagoni of Bassini and Lagoni. He's our architect. He's going to give you some comments on the approach to the project, on how we go into actually designing these homes. Dennis Rosario, our Vice President of Construction, is here. And Steve Abbs, our Vice President of Site Development, is going to give you a couple of minutes about some of the technical aspects of what we've done in this analysis for tonight. Teresa Orlin is also here, and she is a designer assisting Mr. Lagoni tonight. So having said that, we'll get to some of the more technical parts. We do think it's important that you see the context with which we've done this project, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Our card got shuffled a little bit. I'm Carl Lagoni with Bassini and Lagoni Architects, and just very quickly, because we have a limited amount of time, Lot 7 at the Highlands, in a lot of respects, is not any different than any of the other lots from the standpoint that they're very challenging. We're dealing with topography. We're dealing with healthy plant material that we're trying to honor. We're dealing with visibility issues as well as all of the city overlay in terms of the criteria. We feel we've crafted a very sensitively placed home that fits on the lot in a very appropriate fashion. Now, architecturally, you can see one of the renderings behind me here. I don't want to touch a whole lot on the architecture, but the idea here is this is a very eclectic community. There's a lot of different architectural themes out there. Here, this home is springing from a craftsman theme from the arts and crafts movement. And I think one of the best ways we can show it, if we could go ahead and go through the fly-through. Do I get deducted by the time to put it on? It's coming. But the visibility is a couple issues. We've tried to honor the visibility, but where the home is visible, we've tried to create a lot of articulation and character. So if you see it, you're actually seeing a piece of architecture that's very well designed. So you can see we're coming in on the lot. You can see Lot 7. And this demonstrates the massing and the articulation as we rotate around the home. Obviously, there's no vegetation. Okay, and I think that's it, and I'd like to bring Steve up to finish up.
Good evening. I'm Steve Abbs with David on Homes. I just want to first point out that this application has 0 exceptions to the hillside and standard guidelines and standard. The applicant or the appellant has brought up some concerns on his appeal as far as the removal of trees, site visibility, and the alternate sites to the west. As far as the trees are concerned, Mr. Kane and Ms. Hanssen have brought up the fact of tree impacts. First of all, there was only 6 trees being removed off this application. there will be 23 trees required mitigation for that. We are currently proposing 6 trees to be planted on site. As far as impacts to trees, there are numerous trees on site that are in fair to poor condition. Trees are constantly falling, dying out there. It's kind of it's a second grown type of oak tree out there that they were cut down at one point and now they're regrowing. The other thing to point out is on the tree count, there's more than 26 trees on the entire site. The 26 trees are only within the LRDA. So beyond the LRDA, Debbie Ellis did not do a full tree survey because it's something that we didn't impact. So we don't have an actual number of that, but it can far exceed an additional 20 or 30 trees. As far as the visibility, the hillside guidelines clearly define the viewing platform from the corner of Blossom Hill and Los Gatos Boulevard. The picture is taken and the calculation comes out at 21.9%. The less than 25% is not, does not qualify as a visible home per the hillside guidelines. And then the alternatives, we did do some alternatives. To the
Sir,
west.
thank you. Your time is up.
I'll be available for questions.
Do we have any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner O'Donnell?
One of the comments made by the applicant, I guess, was that it would be better if you shifted the lot. Could you address that for us?
Sure. We had, there's an opening, if you can bring up the site plan. There is an opening on the site that has no trees. It's kind of on the northerly downhill portion of the site. We have done some analysis, and I've done 4 alternatives that would try to shift the house over into that location. What's the constraints on this site are the 4 trees that Mr. Weissman is wanting to preserve, which are trees number 608 through 611, which 2 of them are in poor condition, one's in fair to poor condition, and one's in fair to good. But the location of them and the health of them was deemed that they would be able to come out with early on meetings with staff. But the other constraints are the downhill sloping of the site. So there are some height requirements when it comes to the hillside guidelines. You're allowed 25-foot vertical at one point and 35-foot overall building height. So what I have on these alternates is I've got 4 alternates. The first one, A, is saving all 4 trees Mr. Weissman wants to save, placing the site as far as I can over to the west in this clear location. Basically keeping the house at the same elevation as I currently have the applicant or application house. And basically we're condensed to a little 69 by 52 foot house. That includes a 2-car garage. So architecturally and size-wise, aesthetically, it makes it difficult to come up with a house that's compatible for what we've already done in the subdivision. Alternate B did the same thing, but I removed tree 611 to try to get a little more depth and try to get a little more square footage and architecture to this thing. Again, we're condensed to a 69 by 73 foot house. The third alternative C I did was actually trying to lower that house to try to get less visibility by dropping to a maximum 15% grade on the driveway. Only dropped the house 1.2 feet. So again, we're in a little minimal rectangular box there as far as architecture is concerned. And the last alternative I did was trying to get that house as far down into that open space area to try to be below 25% visibility. What that entailed was basically removing an additional good tree on the site, tree number 606, having an 85-foot, 15% driveway downhill, and having a 10-foot retaining wall on the driveway. So that got us to about 23% visibility, which, but feasibility, it added a lot more grading because you got to push the house down 7 feet in the site. If you can look at the renderings there, the house already sits down below the site. If you can envision that house being another 7 feet down the site, I mean, it's just, in a little rectangular box area. It's just something that wouldn't be compatible with the surrounding houses. But the constraints are the downhill sloping area as far as heights. That gets you how deep your house can be. The side width is based upon tree constraints. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Commissioner Talasfor?
Thank you. Lovely as the home is, all the alternatives were with the original design. Is that correct?
The alternatives
All of the alternatives you were mentioning.
was based on taking the existing design and, there was no architecture done for that alternative. This was basically just done on basically a civil design to evaluate how the house would sit on the site.
How this house or any house?
A conceptual house would sit on the site.
Okay.
So in this case, no, we have not done a design for these alternatives. It's basically a rectangular box
Okay.
footprint that would be able to be built in. That's what we had.
Yes,
last year.
that's what I wanted to know. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Just to clarify that point, the house that you were playing around with, for want of a better word, to check, was a smaller house on footprint?
Right, yeah, it basically, if, I've provided these.
Yeah, you gave the
exhibits.
dimensions.
So for example, you can see the size of the house we have. Can you guys hear me?
You can take the mic
Oh,
with
please
you.
take the mic with you. Thank you.
You can see the existing footprint of the current application. This is alternative D. Well, if you can show alternative A real quick, just for. So you can see the existing location of the house. This alternative is trying to save trees 611, 610, 609, and 608. We've come off the edges of these trees to develop a building footprint limit. And then the back of this, also the same of the tree here on the front, the back is determined by the sloping of the lot in order to maintain a 25 foot maximum height and a 35 overall height.
Just, maybe I've misunderstood it, but I basically understood you to say, you gave us some length and width dimensions of the house you haven't designed.
It'd be a footprint that.
Versus the one you have designed. Can you just kind of give us generally the difference? In other words, you gave us length and width, but I'm not sure I got length and width of the present house.
Let's see, I would have to pull that off the. It's 122 foot wide in dimension. Do you guys have a depth? 63 deep.
And that's versus, what was you gave us 70?
The other ones were 69 foot wide down to 47 foot wide on alternate D.
All right, thank you very much.
Any further questions from the commissioners? Seeing none, thank you. Commissioner Kane?
The comment was made on alternative D about the slope, that the driveway would take on a severe slope. And certainly, the property is dramatically sloped. But in looking at Lot 8, that seems to be even more severely sloped. I mean, I was looking at it, I have a project of looking at Lot 7, but I looked at Lot 8, and it's like, if you can put a house there, you could have a driveway sloped on 7.
Well, what we're doing on Lot 8, we have I believe we have submitted, we have our first submittal and for Lot 8. There is a current driveway path to Lot 9, which comes off at the end of the cul-de-sac and straight out to the knoll there. The intent for Lot 8 was to have a shared driveway with Lot 9. So it will be an 18% or 15 to 18% driveway coming down to Lot 8. They'll be able to access off the side, not directly off the cul-de-sac. So it will be following down, I think it's a 75 or 80 foot driveway and that's how we get down to that point. So, yeah, so there's a little more room on Lot 8 to, using that access road on Lot 9 to get down to that point.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
We will now call the appellant, Dr. Wiseman, back up to the podium. Before you come up here, Dr. Wiseman, I ask if anybody has any public comment. See none. You can go ahead and speak. You have 3 minutes.
All the alternatives that have been presented would fit much better on this lot if their sizes were reduced.
I'm going to interrupt you. The applicant was actually supposed to have the time after public comment, and since you're the appellant, you'd be able to speak last. So since there's no public comment, the applicant's allowed the 3 more minutes, and then you have the last say. So if we could have the applicant speak.
My apologies.
And then the applicant might not have anything else to say since there was no other public comment. I'm sorry.
We'll call the applicant back up to the podium.
Yeah, unless you have other questions, again, I just do want to point out that there are 0 exceptions to the hillside guidelines. We feel this is a beautifully designed house for the site. Again, 0 exceptions to the hillside. We have maintained some trees out in front. All the trees that we are removing will be mitigated properly on site. Like I said, we're removing 6 trees. There's going to be 23 mitigation trees required. We're going to plant currently 6 on site, and that 6 does not include what the homeowner will plant in addition to on his landscape scheme. So, so unless you guys have any other questions.
Commissioner Talasfor.
Thank you. Speaking of the trees, so the trees that are beyond the property, and I'm not sure how deep that property, goes. Who owns those trees, or who's in control of those trees? That's beyond that,
right,
where it's all
LRDA.
Grassy, and then.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, yeah, so the additional trees that are not shown on the arborist report are beyond the LRDA. The lot actually.
But nonetheless on the site.
Still on Lot 7, yeah, it's still on the site. The actual approximate dimensions further down beyond the LRDA are actually from the back, well, let's give you a rough dimension from the LRDA down to the rear property line is almost 200 feet. So that 200 feet of, hillside with trees will be maintained by the homeowner.
Okay.
Which by definition of the LRDA, the homeowner can't do anything down there anyway. And I can't remember, there is a scenic easement also beyond the LRDA. So.
I have one other question, and that is, so in your alternative structures, conceptual structures, I know you gave us the widths and all of that, but
Right.
Can you just quickly give me the square footage of each of them?
Well,
I mean, just in general terms.
I mean, if you're looking at 70 by 50, so you can, do a 3,500 square foot minus garage, then cellar, it can be, 5,000 square feet by the time you're done.
Okay, so each of them were about 5,000. They were less than what you have presented here?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Weissman, we invite you back up to the podium. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, the project is in complete compliance with the hillside standards except for the visibility issue. I want to address the tree situation since those trees in our hillsides were a major, if not the major, stimulus for both the Blossom Hill Open Space Study and the hillside development standards. As proposed, this house will result in the removal of 6 or 7 trees. It's in the staff report, it says 7. The arborist also notes that another 8 trees may be significantly impacted, that they will die. I have also compared the tree report for Lot 7 done in 2004 by David Babby for a prior owner with Deborah Ellis's 2014 tree report and find an additional 8 protected trees have been removed in the interim 10 years. So that is a total of 23 trees either gone or at risk. I make no guess as to who removed these other 8 trees illegally, but I do ask, is this proposal consistent with the lot's constraints? So, is this number of trees removed from Lot 7 unusual for a Highlands project? According to a tally kept at engineering, as of February 26th of this year, 222 trees have been removed from the 14 lots now developed. The previous development proposal estimated only 122 to 142 trees. But this tally does not include an unknown number of trees removed after construction on a house has started, and therefore not part of the PPD process. So when do these trees ever get a break? Deborah Ellis notes in her tree reports between January 2013 and December 2014, a period of 23 months, that materials were being stored under trees on various lots, including Lot 7, with heavy equipment and car traffic injuring the trees and causing root compaction. I have seen workmen cleaning their paintbrushes under 2 large oak trees on Lot 13. I have seen cars parked under the largest trees on Lot 2 with oil and other fluids staining the ground there. And I don't walk these roads that often. It is this abuse of existing trees that puts them at risk for premature death and emphasizes the importance of considering potential visibility when calculating the visibility of proposed homes, as I discussed earlier. But oak trees are not all that make up an oak woodland. The understory is crucial, and Deborah Ellis notes that it is best left alone, poison oak and all. Yet extensive understory grading has been done on Lot 14, far from the house, all without specific grading permits, which are required by the hillside standards. Additionally, vast swaths of native scrub and chaparral vegetation have been cleared from lots 9, 10, 11, and 12. And it is not too late to tighten up on these requirements, and I have made some specific suggestions which staff has handed out to you.
Thank you, Dr. Weissman. Your time is up. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Do you have any knowledge as to who removed the trees and the shrubs? So it is not clear then that the developer did it, but perhaps the property owners, subsequent property owners? Just don't know.
It would be a guess.
Okay.
It would be a guess. I just know that they were done between 2004 and 2014. The trees up there have taken just tremendous hits,
All right,
and they continue to.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Dr. Weissman? Commissioner Kane.
Dr. Weissman, what would you have us do with your 6 points? The item that you just gave us. I mean, I've just been handed this document.
I know.
It seems rather powerful, some of the points certainly. What is your suggestion for review implementation? Is this the beginning of a redesign of the guidelines?
Yes, but the redesign of the guidelines take a while. These conditions, these suggestions could be made part of any application, this application, and anything going forth on Highlands.
That we could adopt these as conditions to this application?
Yes. And future application on Highlands. And then the application's coming up on Greenridge Terrace, probably.
To do that tonight, is that a little bit the horse out of the barn? I think for the future, there's something here, but...
Well, look at the pictures that are up on the wall there showing the lawn areas. Clearly in violation of the hillside standards. Those are not just pictures for you, those are pictures that are put on the brochures that are put out in front of the houses as they're being developed. That's certainly more than 30 feet from the house, which is restricted. Lawns are restricted to within 30 feet of the house by the hillside standards. This is false advertising. And I think it shows a total disregard by Davidson for the hillside standards. They say one thing, and then they come in and they have repeated instances of cars parked where they shouldn't be parked, building materials stacked where they shouldn't be stacked. The arborist report has highlighted these problems for over 2 years now, and they were corrected maybe last week. So I think the sooner that the applicant is made aware that the town is serious about their codes and enforcing them, the sooner we're going to get some results.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Dr. Weissman. We
There
will
are
now-
also a bunch of pictures in Deborah Ellis's reports, tree reports, showing, and she points that out, showing material stacked underneath oak trees. This is what kills them. It doesn't kill them today, and it may kill them in 2, 3, 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you. We will now close the public portion of the public hearing and ask if commissioners have any questions, comments, motions. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just want to make a comment that a number of the comments made by the applicant appellant relate to enforcement, seems to me, which is not before us tonight, and that's nothing that we have any control over. But I would agree that perhaps if, in fact, our present existing laws and guidelines are not being observed, that's an enforcement problem. I'm not sure how you solve that problem by simply passing tonight more of the same things if we're not presently enforcing what we have. So what I derive from what is being said here is we could do a better job of enforcement. On the other hand, I assume the town is doing the best it can within the financial constraints. You can't camp somebody out there, but that's at least what I took from the comments. Most of the comments relate to the enforcement of existing guidelines and existing conditions, I think.
Commissioner Kane.
Well, Commissioner O'Donnell, point number 2 on Dr. Weissman's note. If what's being advertised is a violation, we can adopt that as a condition, that even the advertising be in compliance with the guidelines.
I think if he's alleging that the advertising is wrong, the proper body for that is the Department of Real Estate. They have to get a white paper to sell these homes, and if they're violating the Department of Real Estate, they could enforce it. I don't know that the Planning Commission is to enforce brochures or other forms of speech.
Commissioner Hanssen.
What I'm hearing out of this whole thing is there's a bunch of issues melded together. One is our hillside development design guidelines adequate for today's world, and that's not an issue that's in front of us. So we have to use the hillside design guidelines that we have in front of us to make this decision. Then there's also this issue of enforcement, and I did wonder if it's reasonable or even possible to put in a condition for additional arborist checks during the construction process. So I wanted to ask that question because that would at least address one of these concerns.
Sure. So in condition 11, it requires the applicant to comply and then provide responses on how they're going to comply with the consulting arborist's recommendations. One of those is for periodic visits. Should the commission feel that they want to put a timing on that, then that could be added to that condition, that the periodic review by an arborist, by a certified arborist, be done at X intervals.
And you say that's condition 11 in the terms.
Condition 11 references the December 10th, 2014, I believe, arborist report, which contains that recommendation for periodic visits by a certified arborist.
Commissioner Erekson.
So a quick question of staff and then a comment. So the conditions, so wait for Ms. Moseley to get there. The conditions that are here tonight, are they the same conditions that were attached to, that the DRC approved?
Yes.
So there are no changes in the conditions? Okay, thank you. So here would be my comment. So we have an appeal in front of us. We do not have an application in front of us. We have an appeal of and as best I can extract, the appellant has only presented one issue for which that is material or related to the appeal, and that is whether or not the design, the architectural site application and design of this particular home complies with or does not comply with the visibility standards of the hillside guidelines. That's the only issue that I believe that is related to the appeal. All of the other things are related to enforcement and trees and things. But as I understand, what's in front of us is an appeal. And while we weren't presenting anything from the appellant in writing before tonight, and actually there's the only thing that potentially is part of the appeal that's in here is whether or not the lawn area that may or may not be part of the landscape plan that the appellant drew a potential conclusion from an advertising picture. I would want to draw it from a landscape plan to see whether it was, so the best I can figure out, the only issue in front of us is whether or not the design is consistent with the visibility standards of the hillside guidelines. All the rest of the stuff is irrelevant to the consideration here tonight, I believe.
Any further questions? Commissioner Kane.
So just to be specific on the height issue, because I agree with your framing, on page 3 of the 28-page ordinance that covers the project, the maximum height for homes shall be 25 feet unless it is determined that a home will be visible from a town viewing platform, in which case the height shall be reduced to 18 feet. Is the house 18 feet?
The house is not 18 feet. That is, the visible is in reference to what is considered visible in the hillside development standards and guidelines, which is the 25% threshold. And
So
that matches the same hillside development standards and guidelines for any parcel in town, where 25 feet is the maximum. If it's visible from a viewing platform more than 25%, then the height should be reduced to 18 feet.
And this one is 21 point something.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any questions? Would anybody like to entertain a motion? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I will make a motion that we find that no further environmental analysis is required, that the project is consistent with the PD ordinance 2147, that the project is consistent with HDS&G and Hillside Specific Plan, that the project is consistent with the considerations for approval of architectural and site applications, and approve the architectural and site applications S14072, subject to conditions in Exhibit 4 and the development plans Exhibit 12. So that's the motion.
Commissioner Kane.
And along with that motion, we've the denial of the appeal.
All right, and along with that motion, the denial of the appeal.
Commissioner Kane.
Would the maker of the motion agree to add, we've been discussing the definition of periodic, would the maker of the motion be willing to add that the town arborist make these periodic visits at the approval or direction of the community development director?
Let me first find out whether that is not presently the case.
So the
definition is not there.
So the recommendation in the arborist report from the consulting arborist is that a certified arborist go out there. The town arborist typically does not go out and do the monitoring of these individual sites. It's a certified arborist. So whether that's Ms. Ellis or some other certified arborist. But
well, the question I have, because I would support that, but I want to understand it. If this attachment were not made, as suggested by Commissioner Kane, what would the town do by way of periodic inspections during construction?
from an arborist, we require a compliance memo from the applicant at time of building permits to address how they are planned to address each of those conditions. And then we would review that and determine whether or not we thought that was appropriate.
So you'd review the plan, but you wouldn't necessarily review the implementation.
we review the implementation through that compliance memorandum. The most frequent town employees that are out there are building inspectors and engineering inspectors in this specific development, because with all the grading.
So if I understand Commissioner Kane, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's wondering, or he's suggesting that we have a certified arborist from time to time during construction inspect to see if it's in compliance with the plans. Do I understand the suggestion?
Yes, and I'm not pretending I know what that periodic definition should be. But if it was in the condition, if we carried it forward to future considerations, subject to the direction or definition of the community development director, at least we would have a number. You decide what that number is, monthly, every 2 weeks, because the assertion being made here is that trees are disappearing. And you have pointed out, Commissioner O'Donnell, we don't seem to have any code enforcement. So I'd just like to get a definition of periodic and discourage the disappearance of trees.
I don't have a problem to the suggested amendment, and I would incorporate it into the motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Do we have any further discussion before we take a vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Mr. Paulson, are there appeal rights of the actions of the Planning Commission?
There are appeal rights. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. The forms are available in the clerk's office. There's a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
Thank you. We will now consider agenda item number 2, which is conditional use permit application U-14-022, requesting approval for a high turnover sit-down restaurant, pizza studio on property zone CHPD. May I have a show of hands by the commissioners who have visited the site? Are there any disclosures by any commissioners? Seeing none. Ms. Walters, I understand you're giving the staff report tonight.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. The subject tenant site would be located at the Sandy Lane Commercial Shopping Center at the northwest corner of Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill Road. The applicant is requesting approval to operate the high turnover sit-down restaurant. The proposed restaurant use would be located between the coffee shop tenant space Phil's Coffee and the bank tenant space. The applicant is proposing 30 seats, which would require a total of 10 parking spaces per the town code. The total number of parking provided at the commercial center includes 121 on-site commercial spaces and 10 parking space credits from the residential portion of the planned development. The overall parking for the PD meets the 190 total required parking spaces for the residential and commercial uses. As approved in the PD, the commercial site was short 10 spaces. However, the residential portion of the development had extra parking spaces that could be applied to the overall development. The approved PD for the site supported this arrangement because one of the intended benefits of the mixed-use development is to provide residents with commercial services within walking distance from their homes. By locating the additional parking within the residential portion of the development, the residents have more available guest parking for the use on the regular basis. Town Council, staff, and the town attorney find the parking credit was approved as a part of the PD and architecture and site applications, and therefore the commercial center provides adequate parking for the 30 seats. Staff recommends approval, and I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walters. Are there any questions? Commissioner Hanssen?
I had 2 questions. One was the operating hours for the other 2 restaurants, Phil's Coffee and Super Duper Burger. I know we looked at it, but I didn't remember compared to this. And then I have a second question too.
Offhand, I can't remember the opening hours. However, the evening hours are the same. Mm-hmm. Earlier than 10?
Yeah.
I can't recall with Phil, so I would have to
Okay.
check.
Well, they might be a little bit different than, but they're comparable to Super Duper Burger, which is probably more like them.
More of a from the morning, not serving breakfast, but the lunch and evening
Okay.
services.
And then my second question was about parking. Going back to our planning commission discussion about the parking, our recommendation was for them to reduce the number of seats. And now my understanding was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the town council approved it with the original number of seats, because of the parking credit. Is that correct?
That is correct. They approved the 65 seats for Super Duper Burger.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
This proposal would not be in compliance but for additional 10 parking spots, which are really not there for commercial development, but they're there for the residential.
That is correct. The overall commercial site needs the 121 on-site spaces as well, counting as the 10. However, with the current uses that are proposed and approved for the site, there would be an additional 5 spaces that are not accounted for or not used at this time.
I drove by the site tonight before most of this stuff is open, and it was very busy. A lot of cars parked there. I shudder to think what it would be like if we develop it out as we're doing it, but that's an editorial comment.
Any further questions? Commissioner Kane?
Question for staff. I went during the daytime, and two or three of the businesses were not yet open, but Phil's Coffee was open, and it was busy. And I noticed printed on the ground in some of the parking places, energy efficient vehicle. What is the phrasing of what's on the ground?
I think it's clean air.
Clean air.
Clean air.
Clean air
And it's
vehicle.
stenciled onto the space.
What is a clean air vehicle?
That's a great question. I'm going to defer that to Ms. Parvetti.
Yeah. State building code recently changed to essentially require parking spaces for energy efficient vehicles. So clean air vehicles could be hybrids, they could be all electric, they could be any number of different types of vehicles, but we have to identify spaces for those vehicles.
Well, the town attorney may appreciate this, but am I to take it that if I park in the handicap zone and get a $231 ticket, that's a standard? But the clean air vehicle is a guideline, and I really could park there even with an ugly, dirty car?
Until we change our code, which we're in the process of doing, to make definitions for the clean air vehicles. So right now, it's not in our town code for a parking, but we will be bringing that forward as an amendment.
So for all of us to know, it's a preference, it's a guideline.
I believe right now it is.
Thank you.
But we are changing our code.
Commissioner Talas?
Yeah, just to tag on to that. So then the clean air parking places do not affect what we would typically look for in parking spaces anywhere.
They do not. They're part of the required parking, so they don't get counted any less than a regular parking space.
So it is a guideline. So you could park there, Mr. Kane.
Commissioner Hanssen?
Just related to that, what is the calculation of the number of required clean air spaces relative to the overall parking? Or is it just arbitrary at this point?
It's not arbitrary. It's in the building code.
It's in the building code?
Green building code. So depending on the number of spaces you have to have a certain percentage of those be clean air vehicle spaces. We don't have that information with us this evening.
Okay, so you don't know off the top of your head, out of the 120
not.
spaces, how many are actually the clean air? Okay.
Commissioner O'Donnell, followed by Commissioner Kane.
Do we have any statistics based on our prior experience as to how often those spaces are used? What I'm concerned about, I guess, is I think we're short of spaces on this with our imaginary 10 spaces. And if we were, for example, were to put in 10 clean air vehicles and we only consistently use 5 of them would sit there. And so do we know whether what we're going to require will be used or not used?
Yeah, we don't have that data for you this evening, Commissioner. I do want to just remind the Commission that the Council approved the plan development with the parking standards as described by Ms. Walters. So those are the guidelines under which the review of this particular application should be considered. I think your concerns for Super Duper and the line of questioning we're hearing tonight indicates the Commission's overall concern with this development, but I do want to just remind you what is before you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parvetti. Commissioner Kane, you had your hand up?
Only to answer the other commissioner's question, I counted 10 of those spaces, but I have the same feeling as Commissioner O'Donnell. We're tight on those parking places as it is, and if a person sees something printed on the ground and makes an analogy to a handicap spot, they're not going to park there. And so those spaces will remain open, and what we see as a potential problem will become more of a potential problem. Because when I went out there to see Super Duper, those stencils were not on the ground. So I didn't see them. And now they're on the ground, and I do have that concern. If it's a state law, we're stuck, but we may need to re-examine how that pans out in the future. Do we need more spaces than we're currently requesting?
Commissioner O'Donnell.
When the town council decided that the parking was adequate, were they aware of the requirements for clean vehicles?
I do not know.
It wasn't brought before them,
Was not.
so that their decision then did not take into consideration what we're talking about tonight.
Did not.
So I assume that we could talk about that without being disrespectful to the town council.
Do we have any further questions of Ms. Walters? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Walters. We will now open the public portion of the public hearing and allow the applicant 5 minutes to address the commission. I will now call Jeff Burrill to the podium. You will have 5 minutes to address the commission.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Burrell, and I am the managing partner of Studio 37, which is a LLC that operates as the pizza studio. I am very much looking forward to having the opportunity to open a pizza studio in Los Gatos. What Pizza Studio is, and I don't know if you've seen the description of our business that I wrote up, but it is, I think, something that would really fit well in and be a benefit to the town of Los Gatos. We provide healthful food, meat served without the use of hormones or antibiotics in a relatively quick fashion, but we take tremendous pride in the product that we serve. I myself have been a restaurateur for over 20 years. I'm a local Almaden resident, and would very, very much look forward to the opportunity to open this. We have been in contact, I personally have been in contact with the HOA president, Mr. Yu, and addressed any and all concerns that he had about our use and about everything and anything that he asked about Pizza Studio. And had a wonderful working relationship with him, and he does not have any further concerns, or at least expressed any in our conversations. So, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Commissioner Talasfor.
You talked to the HOA president of the association of the condos?
Yes.
That are on the,
Yes.
May I just ask you what one concern they had?
He asked me several different questions. For example, what time would we take deliveries? What type of, whether or not, what types of hoods that we use. And by the way, the utilization of our baking materials do not require type 1 or type 2 hoods. So his concern was, will there be smoke? And there is not in our application. So we use special ovens that are designed and engineered for use without type 1 or type 2 hoods. So they were those types of questions.
Those are actually really good questions.
Sure.
So we should maybe have asked. I just have one other question. It's not even a question, but one of the architectural features of the building that you'll be occupying are the almost ceiling to floor windows, the paned windows. And as we did with the Super Duper Burgers, they also have those paned windows. And we had asked that there wouldn't be any stacking in front of those windows of, chairs, extra chairs, or restaurant supplies, or things that would deteriorate from the view and not enhance it.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that would not, we would want to make it as beautiful from the outside, and that would not attract people to come in. And clearly something we would not.
Okay, I may offer to, or may want to make that a condition, just so that we have that cleared, because we did with the other application.
Completely understand.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
You've been in the restaurant business for 25 years?
Yes, sir.
So you opened other locations?
Yes, sir.
Do you normally do a parking study before you sign a lease?
I personally don't do the parking study. I sign a lease with the landlord who does the parking study. So the parking study was done by, the developer. We don't then go out and do a parking study on top of that.
But you analyze, I hope, you analyze the parking study?
We make sure that the parking is in compliance, or we couldn't sign the lease. So
I've dealt with restaurants for a long time, too. Sometimes success is more than one anticipated. So I'm just wondering whether you personally did any analysis as to whether the parking would be inadequate for your operation when everything is up and running.
Well, so to answer your question directly, I did not commission a study to do it. I personally have been in the business for 25 years. I've visited the site many, many times. I'm a local resident. I am confident that the parking is adequate for our use.
And how many parking spots then are there available to you?
Well, they're not designated pizza studio parking spots. I believe Ms. Walters, it's 10, yeah. So because we are restricted to 30 seats, we are allocated 10 parking spots.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hanssen.
I actually had several questions for you, and it was generally about the business. First of all, in looking at the business, it sounded very interesting and like it would be a good thing for Los Gatos. You said you were in the business for 25 years, but Pizza Studio hasn't been around for 25 years, has it?
No,
Or-
Pizza Studio itself has only been around for about 2.5 years.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
Now, it got started in Southern California. How many locations in total do you have, and how many are in the Bay Area right now?
So there are 2 open in the Bay Area, and I own them both. One in Mountain View and one in Palo Alto.
Okay.
And hopefully this will be the 3rd.
And the size of the location in Los Gatos compared to the Palo Alto and Mountain View locations, is it comparable?
So the Palo Alto the Los Gatos location is a little bit larger than the locations in Mountain View and Palo Alto. In Palo Alto, we actually bought an existing restaurant, and we were only limited to the size of the restaurant. In Mountain View at San Antonio Center, at San Antonio and El Camino, there was one retail space available, and it was 1,403 square feet. If I could do it over again, I would have taken a larger space because I believe we only have about 12 seats in that one. So we are happy that the Los Gatos space is larger because we think that we can do a better job.
Okay. And I know it's not in the application for conditional use permit, but do any of your locations at all serve alcohol?
No, they don't.
Okay. And there's no plans to?
And we have no plans to.
Okay.
Commissioner Talasfor.
Follow-up question, and that is about, I was just dawned on me, do you do takeout?
We do takeout. We do not do delivery. But if someone orders to take out, we will put it in a box and they'll take out.
Okay, and you have a plan for where they're going to wait
For sure.
and the tables and everything?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Commissioner Erekson.
So while I appreciate that everyone's concluded that there's adequate parking, and I don't have any disagreement with that, I have a practical question for you, though, that I'm having a difficult time with. So what you submitted to the town on the 17th of February of this year said the maximum number of employees at one time would be 10 to 14. So if in fact you have allocated 10 spaces, and I understand that they're not marked spaces, but let's assume everybody at a particular moment in time is in full operation and everybody has the number of people that they would consume their allocated parking spaces. So what do you have a plan with your employees? Because if my math is correct, you could potentially have more employees than you have parking spaces allocated to you. And so when I want to come get my my craft design artisan pizza with my grandkids, we're going to have to walk because we can't drive there because we won't be able to park any place because all of the 10 parking spaces that I might have parked with are be occupied by your employees.
Yeah, so
So how do you operationalize the fact that you've held out to us? You'll have potentially 10 to 14 employees there, and you have 10 spaces allocated to you.
So we've come up against this in Palo Alto, let's say, where the parking is extremely limited on California Avenue. And what we do is, clearly it would be a poor business decision to allow employees to park in lieu of customer spaces. So we work with our associates, our employees, to find legal parking spaces that they can park, and if they need to walk or ride share or whatever it takes, but to not take up a limited amount of space for paying customers. That would just be, and that's what we've done in let's say in Palo Alto, is we've identified lots that they can, that are legal for them to park at and walk, as long as, and complying with all the parking rules and regulations, and making it right for our guests.
So
Commissioner
I
Erekson?
assume you know where Placer Oaks road is. It's the road that's north of the site.
Okay.
So, given your answer, can you appreciate why the Placer Oaks neighborhood neighbors might be concerned about your answer? Well, it's legal to park in front of their houses. If you regularly had employees parking in front of their houses, which is legal to plan, because there's not a neighborhood kind of thing at this moment in time, you might just think about whether that would be okay if you lived in that neighborhood.
I completely understand, and if there were, it's not our objective to come into a community and upset, especially neighbors. So certainly, we would work with any neighbors that said, hey, if we've noticed that your employees are parking there, we would find an amenable solution. And we are, we are here to become a productive part and partner in the community, and not any type of negative influence.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Before I ask a question, and I may not, can I ask staff a question? The question would be, the applicant has 30 seats and therefore is required to have 10 parking spots. I assume that requirement also contemplates that the applicant, any applicant who had that many seats, would also have employees.
Correct.
So in that 10, that ordinance, statute, whatever it is, takes into consideration the employees.
That's correct. There's no separate parking requirement for employees for any business in town.
Under that, you could have 10 employees parked in the 10 spaces, and that would be fully compliant with the requirements of this town.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Burrell? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
We will now invite comments from members of the public. I now call Tom Kansunji to the podium. You will have 3 minutes to speak.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tom Kansunji. I represent CHL Ventures, the developer, and I will only take 30 seconds. I just wanted to stress how excited we are to have Pizza Studio come to our development and complete the retail space that is there. And like them, we are prepared to work with the HOA and the neighbors, whoever they may be. Thank you.
Any questions? Commissioner Kane?
Let's assume there's another applicant coming after this one. I wouldn't want to be him or her. Because we're doing these one at a time, and each time we learn more about what if. Now we've learned today, 10 employees take up to 10 spots. Commissioner O'Donnell from the beginning of the first applicant said, I have concerns about parking. I didn't pay too much attention. The numbers looked right. I didn't think about employees, and I didn't think about ecologically advantaged vehicles and how that's going to be stenciled on the ground. I think we have a problem because what the gentleman said who's opening up the restaurant in Palo Alto, we pay attention to that, and we have our employees go to convenient parking lots. We don't have any parking lots. We have them downtown. They're not going to put them there. They're going to go over to Whole Foods. They're going to go down Placer Oaks. And I think it's unfair that we're bringing this up to this particular applicant. It's going to be more unfair to the next applicant. But we need to pay attention to this. And as the owner of the development, I would encourage you to have your tenants, and I'm speaking off the cuff without any authority, have your tenants have a plan for parking where they don't take up the commercial potential customer parking, but they also don't take up residential parking, put them on the roof. We have not thought of this before, but I think you need a plan.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Noted.
The prior speaker, the applicant said apparently you or your organization did a parking study. Is that correct?
We commissioned a parking study together with staff, I guess.
So the town's parking study is also your parking study?
That is correct, Commissioner.
All right, thank you very much.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Natalie Ladd. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Natalie Ladd, and I'm at 653 Blossom Hill Road. I'm actually one of the I'm a resident that lives in the homes adjacent to the commercial space, and I'm actually one of the board members on the HOA as well. I had not planned on speaking, but since you guys had some questions, I wanted to address that. I'm also a commissioner on the Transportation and Parking Committee, and one of the things that we've discussed is a lot of the businesses along Los Gatos Boulevard, the employees park on Los Gatos Boulevard. There's quite a few parking spaces all along with the police department, Whole Foods, Jack in the Box. I drive by there every day and I see tons and tons of parking spaces, and I'm hoping the employees will park there instead of in the parking lot or Placer Oaks. I think that should be a solution, so I just wanted to address that for you guys. Some of the concerns that we had with any of the businesses coming in had originally arisen from the problems that we have where the Starbucks location is, which is the Blossom Hill Pavilion. And we've been reassured that these problems are not going to happen, but I wanted to tell you what these concerns was. One was the ventilation, which I think it's taken care of. Another is Starbucks gets deliveries every morning at 7:30 in the morning by a huge truck that dumps their rail and makes a lot of noise, and they park on Blossom Hill for like 10, 15 minutes. I believe they're not supposed to do that, but they are, so we're addressing that with code compliance. They were also mowing the lawns at 5:30 in the morning. Code compliance stopped that, so they no longer do that. They also go through the parking lot and clean the parking lot like 2, 3 in the morning, waking us up. I think that's it, the landscaping, the parking lot, and the big truck. So these are the concerns, but after reading all the paperwork, I think it's all addressed with the new businesses, and it's not going to be a problem, but I wanted to share that information with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ladd. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We have no more speaker cards, so we will now allow the applicant back up to the podium for 3 minutes to add any further comments regarding the application. That would be you.
Tell us what's changed in the last 3 minutes.
Well, I think I kind of need to apply some color to my comment on the parking when I compare Palo Alto to Los Gatos. Now, Palo Alto has no parking. It's a downtown location, so it's really not an apples to apples comparison. But I think that the opportunity to park on Blossom Hill Road is wonderful. But at the end of the day, we want it to be convenient for our guests to be able to come in and enjoy our product. It wouldn't be good business to go in any other direction. I'm very, very excited about the opportunity and welcome any further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanssen.
Actually, I just thought of this in looking at, it said in your business plan that it's 65% dine-in and 35% takeout, and I know one of the other commissioners asked if you have a plan for that, but it made me think of parking, like some of the places like Chili's or, restaurants I've seen, will have designated parking spaces for takeout. Is that something that you're intending to do?
It's something that we always ask the landlord for permission to have designated takeout spots, and I'm not sure if that's a part of my lease. No, it's not. It's something I ask for every time because I do think that that's wonderfully convenient.
Okay, because I did notice it said you have 65% dine-in and 35% takeout, so that's a pretty hefty, more than a third of your business.
Yeah, that's a relatively small sample size of 2 restaurants that we have open. In Los Gatos, it may be 80-20 dine-in. It's clearly more dine-in, but we've got 2 open, so I don't have a large sample.
Any further questions? Commissioner Kane?
Did staff have its hand up for guidance on that?
Well, we don't allow people to designate parking spots for takeout or delivery unless they have an excessive amount of extra parking other than what's required, which clearly that's not the case here.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Burrow.
Thank you.
We will now close the public portion of the public hearing and ask if Commissioner O'Donnell, you have your hand up?
This is a question to staff. As it's probably obvious, some of us are nervous about the parking. On the other hand, we do not have a right to impose our concerns. We've got to stay within the ambit of what we're dealing with, and I want to do that. But we've raised a couple questions, one of which would be the parking along the north side. I know, we've dealt with the neighbors who have been very reasonable but very concerned about their neighborhood. But I don't know if we are permitted to put a condition, for example, on this operation to say that you will see that your employees do not park on that street. It's a public street. And I don't know to what extent our abilities would extend to telling somebody don't do what is otherwise allowed by law. So that's my question.
I'll offer a comment, and then if the town attorney has any additional comments. I don't know that we can stop folks from parking in areas where there's not permit parking or some other mechanism to restrict that. However, we have many businesses that are in close proximity to residential, and downtown's a good one also. Most of that is parking permit only, so there's some limitations there. But we strive to work with both businesses and residents to ensure that those challenges are addressed as appropriate. Now, is it a perfect solution? No, but I'd offer the town attorney.
We can't help you, though. What I was trying to do was say, is there anything we can do to help that? And I think you're saying no.
No.
As a condition, it would be a nightmare to enforce. I think if it becomes a problem, though, then that's when we would probably look at issuing permits for the neighborhood parking, and that would eliminate probably the issue if it starts to blossom.
Okay, and just again, the question, our parking study put in 10 spaces that are in the residential area and did not consider the advent of this restricted parking. I understand it's not restricted yet by law, but I've been told by staff and the town attorney that in all likelihood it will be, a penalty will be imposed. So the traffic study does not consider that recent change in the law, is what I've been told. I just want to make sure the record is clear on that. So we have 10 spaces that are not located near or about the businesses. And secondly, we have some undisclosed number of spots which could only be used by these environmentally sensitive cars, and that was not taken into account. So that's apparently where we are.
And I would just add that it's a great discussion that we'll have to bring up with council when we bring the ordinance on how we deal with this issue, because I've seen it in some very large developments where there is a sliding scale by how many parking spots you have to have clean air, and there's 30 spots that are just empty. So.
Commissioner Erekson, followed by Commissioner Talasfor, and then Commissioner Kane.
So I believe this is actually a question for Ms. Pravetti. So and I trust that Commissioner Kane can count, so I'll trust him that there are 10 parking spaces for clean air vehicles at the site. So let's just assume that for the moment. So do those parking spaces have to be in the, quote, what I'm going to refer to as the commercial parking lot, or can they be in the residential parking lot? And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question, because there are 10 extra spaces in the residential area, and there are 10 presumably clean air vehicle ones. So could we move the clean air vehicle spots to those 10, or could we move 5 of them to the residential spots, given that the PD is making an assumption that 5 of the parking spots in the residential area are counting toward the commercial? So could we even move 5 of them to the commercial on the presumption that 5 of them are being counted in the residential area toward the commercial parking? Do you understand the 2 different questions?
And I really appreciate the commission looking at this, recognizing that the plan development was approved 2011 or so, and I believe my recollection is that the Cal Green Code went into effect in 2013. So there is a gap, and it's my recollection that it applies to all land uses, commercial and residential. But I believe communities have some leeway in terms of how much clean air parking they wish to provide. So I believe, as the town attorney stated, Los Gatos still probably has some work to do. So I think this may be more of an action item in terms of how is the center actually performing, and can we work together to find a solution in terms of making sure that there's adequate parking for all the patrons of the center as well as for the residents. So I think your comments are all excellent, and we'll do what we can within the limits of the permits and approved zoning to address this. And I think it's going to take some ongoing monitoring once all the office space is also occupied with its tenants as well.
Commissioner Erekson, you have another question to follow up?
So can I ask a question from a simple-minded guy? So I understood everything you just said. Does that mean that we could potentially, I'm using the royal we, the town, not necessarily the planning commission, that we could potentially reduce the number of clean air vehicle spaces below 10? Because you said the town has some discretion.
Well, we have to look at state law and understand, because, they needed to provide those stenciled spaces as part of getting their final building permits, et cetera. So I know I'm not prepared right now.
So for commercial, it's 8% of the parking spaces have to be clean air. So I think it's 11 or 10 for this.
8% of commercial?
Yes. And I don't know the requirement for residential. I haven't found it yet.
So, okay, given that, Mr. Town Attorney, so given, again, let me re-ask the question. So given that 5 of the spaces that are being counted for commercial purposes are actually in the residential area, can we stripe 5 of those and count them as, given that that's the assumption that the council is on the record for having made?
The parking requirement for the clean air vehicles is based on the number of physical spaces on the site. So the 10 spaces is 8% of the 121 spaces that are in the commercial portion of the development.
But the question is, the commercial part of the development takes into account 10 spaces which are adjacent to and arguably on, because we're treating it as such. Based on the reasoning of the council, are you saying we could not use those 10 spaces for almost anything? Because if we could use it for something, we could use it for this. So is it we can't use it for anything? It's just there?
The 10 spaces, if you want to call them phantom spaces, they used the residential spaces, but said they couldn't be used for commercial purposes. So I don't know how you could now change the commercial requirement of the spaces and put them over in the residential area. I mean, we can certainly look at that, but I'm not
But
going to
we
make.
count them for purposes of the commercial businesses,
They
right?
basically gave, if you want to look at it another way, they basically gave an exception to the parking. They gave them an exception of 10 spaces.
With the phantom spaces, okay.
Yes.
Commissioner Talasfore, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I was wanting to make a motion. Now, I don't know what I'm going to make the motion about. Because I have the same concerns. But I almost feel like we have to just accept what's in front of us because we can't really change anything at this point. But I think the discussion has been good. And I liked hearing Ms. Pavetti say that this is something we will be discussing or should be discussing soon. So with that, I would still attempt a motion, unless anyone wants another comment.
Commissioner Kane had his hand up for a comment, or should Commissioner Talasfore proceed?
No, Commissioner Erekson offered to buy me a Coca-Cola if I would put forth that we should have clean air vehicles for takeout pizza. Parking spaces, if we could look into that, while there's still spaces left. We could.
Thank you for the comment. Commissioner Talasfore?
Okay, let me attempt this motion. And I'm hoping that somehow what we've discussed here would get up to council, and I don't know how that, I don't know if I can make that a part of this motion or not.
Yes, we'll be happy to let them know that there was discussion about the broader parking concerns.
Right, okay. So I would like to go ahead and make a motion for approval of conditional use permit application U-14-022 at 681 Blossom Hill Road, Suite 100. It's requesting approval of a conditional use permit for a high turnover sit-down restaurant, pizza studio on property zone CHPD, and the APN is 529-65-028. And it would be approval subject to conditions. I would like to add the one condition about this, leaving the windows free of stacked materials. Let's put it that way, to preserve and enhance the architecture of the building. I can make the required findings for CEQA, that there's no further environmental analysis required because the mitigated negative declaration and monitoring and reporting program were adopted by the town council in June 6, 2011 for a mixed-use development. And I can also make required findings for the conditional use permit as required by Section 2920, 190 of the Town Code for granting one. And that would be A and 1 through 4 in Exhibit 2. And that would be my motion. And if I could do something about the parking, I would.
Commissioner Hanssen? Any further discussion? Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'm not going to be supporting the motion. I understand the motion, and I understand the reasoning of the motion. The conclusion of the staff is that there would be no traffic or parking impacts, notwithstanding that no analysis has ever been made of the subsequently adopted state law. So we don't even know what the impacts would be, let alone that there would be none. There's nothing to support that. Secondly, the phantom spaces, I don't know to what extent they will continue to haunt us. But I will say this, I've had some experience with small centers like this that are very successful. And the noon hour, for example, is an absolute disaster. So I will not be supporting that motion because I don't think that, based on the record, we've considered the change in state law, and I don't think the use of those 10 phantom spaces, pursuant to the discussion tonight, should be considered for this. Notwithstanding what the council did, I'm really saying I don't agree with it.
Commissioner Erekson, I wasn't sure if you had your hand up, but I have Commissioner Talasfore and Commissioner Kane. Was your hand up? Okay, go ahead.
So with the indulgence of the chair, I have a question for the town attorney, and then depending upon what the answer is, I have a comment to make to my commissioners. So if in fact a motion is made to deny this application, there are no findings required for a motion to deny. Is that correct? It's just a motion to deny.
A motion to deny, but it would be helpful to provide some supporting.
I didn't ask whether it would be helpful. I asked, are there findings required for a motion to deny? Don't believe so.
You would basically need to identify why you can't make the findings for the conditional use permit. So you'd essentially look at exhibit number 2 and go through each of those findings, and if you could make the finding one or more that you are not able, that the use will, for example, impair the integrity and character of the zone, and provide documentation or justification as to why, that could be the basis for your denial.
Okay, I have with the indulgence of the chair, I have a question. So I've been on the Planning Commission for almost 7 years now, and the consistent answer to the question which I ask is that there are no findings required when there's a motion to deny in this particular case. So it would have been helpful to get this perspective 7 years ago, because we've made, since I've been on the Planning Commission, we have made motions to deny applications similar to this. And I'm not talking about subdivision ones or those kinds of things. I'm talking about ones where we deny them where there's no findings required. That's okay. So apparently we have to do that. I'll make my comment to my fellow commissioners anyway. Apparently we can't do what I was going to suggest, which is make a motion, defeat the motion which is before us, make a motion to deny as a protest motion, if you would. Deny this application. I'm quite confident the applicant would appeal it to the body which that would be appealed to, which would cause the issues to go to the body who created the problems that we can't solve.
So if I could just 1 second, because this clean air vehicle issue just came up tonight, so I had no research on it whatsoever, but I've been able to do a little bit. So on a private lot, police can only enforce 2 provisions under the state law, and that's handicap parking and fire lanes. So currently, as our current zone looks, our police would not be able to enforce any of the clean air vehicle requirements that are on these private lots. They can enforce it if it's part of a public lot. For example, if we build a new public structure, it's going to require so many clean air parking lots, and then we'd have to enforce it. But on private lots, we would not, unless, of course, we enact an ordinance that would require it ourselves to enforce it. But under state law, we would not.
Commissioner, was there more?
No.
Commissioner Kane, you had your hand up next.
I agree completely with Commissioner O'Donnell. I think I've said that before.
The sky's falling.
And I agree with Commissioner Erekson. I agree with everything that's been said. We've got a problem, possibly, with this parking. If the pizza place has 10 or more employees, which happens to match their parking requirement, the veterinarian has 24, the animal hospital has 13, there's a vacant with 17 coming in, Super Duper's got 22, Phil's Pizza's got 4, probably needs more help. Chase, the bank, has 14. So my point, Tom, is I don't want to penalize this applicant. I don't want to delay his project because we have a protest or something. If there's a member of town council watching this video, and I'm told they do, hello out there, they need to get the message that we have a concern that maybe there's going to be a parking problem. But to delay, and you've said you would carry it forward for us to them, but to delay this applicant to me just doesn't seem fair at all.
Commissioner O'Donnell had his hand up first.
I believe you can deny the motion based on a lack of evidence in the record to support the proposal. For example, we did an environmental impact report, which we all rely on, notwithstanding that the law has changed since, and no consideration has been given to the change in the law. We're finding out tonight that the town attorney is doing a wonderful job of reading it this evening to find out what some of the answers are. But notwithstanding his intelligence, reflection is sometimes helpful. So guess the thing I'm troubled by, I don't want to penalize this man either. I think you ought to have a store, and I think you ought to open it. But on the other hand, I am very, very concerned about the parking, and he will not be a happy camper if his people can't park or his customers can't park. And I think the basis upon which we've been going forward, notwithstanding we haven't even considered everything, all I want to do is not attach my name to it. If it passes, so be it. The council is the council. They got elected. They must be smarter than we are. And that's fine. But I just couldn't in good conscience support it.
So, a couple of comments to that. So the parking is not a CEQA issue. The council has already issued a PD and ordinance and gave the number of parking spaces for the number of retail space. And so the developer has a vested right on this. So somewhere it has to be approved, or else you can't just, even no matter how bad the parking is going to be at this location, it's already been determined. I think what you're saying is to tell the developer that you can't even put in a tenant in that space, which he's already been granted that right to do.
I'm not telling him anything. I'm just telling you in good conscience, I can't support something that's going to hurt him as well as the neighborhood, as well as the whole development. And if council wants to do that, they'll have it, depending on what happens tonight, they either it will pass tonight or the council will do what they're going to do.
Commissioner Talasfor.
So one thing that I have to amend my motion, by the way, because I just saw that I also need to approve the conditional use permit application. And I did do that. I'm sorry. Ugh, I was looking. Anyway, I think my only comment is that when this whole development was being designed, parking was always an issue. 10, now we have more we have to account for. But it was always an issue. But the one thing that I remember standing out was the comment that what we were hoping that would happen is that this development with its restaurants and neighborhood friendly services would make people walk and get out of their cars, walk from all the neighborhoods that are nearby. And that's really one of the reasons that I think in the end that we approved it at both levels. So with that, I will still stand by my motion, and I think that the council has heard all of this, and also with what the information from our town attorney, Mr. Schultz, just gave us, that the proprietor has the owner of the development has a vested right to develop.
Commissioner Kane.
I'm going to repeat that I agree with Tom, and I have those concerns, but we have already approved the animal hospital, the animal marketplace, Super Duper, Phil's Coffee, Chase the Bank. I cannot hold this applicant, I cannot penalize this applicant for our failure to have vision 6, 8, 9, 10 months ago when we shoulda, woulda, coulda. So I'm going to vote for the motion and hope that wiser, smarter people look at this and improve things in the future. Can I call the question, or shall we just continue to have discussion?
Well, Commissioner Hanssen had her hand up next.
We should do that then.
I just wanted to make a comment, and the reason I seconded the motion is because I don't think we can hold this particular applicant responsible for the parking situation, even though I agree it's a problem. I was in Palo Alto a couple weeks ago, and there was a line out the door all the way down the street for Phil's Coffee. I have no idea where those people were parking, but I know we drove around trying to find parking for a place to eat somewhere else, and it was at least a 15-minute process. But nonetheless, I don't think we can hold this particular applicant responsible. And furthermore, in terms of the benefit to the community, I think this whole development's about this whole idea of mixed use. It's ideally located close to several schools. When I first looked into this particular business, I envisioned kids from Fisher coming out over after school, parents coming with their families from Vasona Park and whatnot, and so I actually think this is the ideal kind of business for this location, and I too am concerned about the parking, but I'm not willing to hang that over this particular application.
Commissioner Erekson.
with the indulgence of the chair, I'd like to ask the staff a question which, depending on what the answer is, could result in my suggesting to the maker of the motion a change in a condition. So do we have, okay, so we already have on record from the applicant, this particular applicant, the fact that they will max out their allocated parking spots by their employees. I've been in Phil's Coffee probably 10 times already since they've opened. They have allocated to them 4 parking spots. They have 4 baristas. They've had 4 baristas alone every time I've been in there, and that doesn't count the cashier and some other people who are working in there. So my question is, we didn't, in my judgment, we didn't get a very adequate answer from the owner about, about having a plan with his employees about carpooling or alternative. Do we have precedent where we could require that kind of condition where we would ask them to have a employee, I don't know what you would call it, an employee transportation plan where I don't know, I'm in uncharted territory for myself, so I'm asking the staff, and if so, if there's precedent for that or there's some way we could do that, I might suggest to the maker of the motion that we would amend a condition or add a condition.
Looking at staff because they have more historical knowledge, I don't believe we've required that in other permits, and especially for this development, but it's something that you could do as an encourage or to submit a plan. It's just from an enforcement standpoint, again, sure, where we would be with an enforcement issue.
So we have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any further discussion? Are we ready for a vote? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-2. 4-2. I can't count. Sorry, I'm just a planning commissioner.
And for the record, the opposed were O'Donnell and Erekson.
Mr. Paulson, are there appeal rights of the actions of the commission on this item?
There are appeal rights. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available in the clerk's office. There's a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
I'm going to suggest, would anybody like to take a break? I'm going to recommend that we take a 10-minute break, if that's okay with you, Ms. Savage. Thank you. We'll adjourn back at 5 minutes after 9. We will now call the Planning Commission meeting back to order, and we are moving to item number 3, our last item on the agenda, which is Architecture and Site Application S-14-036, requesting approval to demolish an existing single-family residence and to construct a new single-family residence on properties owned R18. May I have a show of hands from the commissioners who have visited the site? Are there any disclosures by a commissioner? Commissioner Kane.
When I visited the site, I was approached by 2 residents, Mr. Gremzebach and Mr. Ross, and Mr. Ross offered to take me on a tour of the neighborhood. That's the extent of it.
Thank you. Any other disclosures? Seeing none. Ms. Savage, I understand you'll be giving the staff report this evening.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. The applicant is proposing a 2-story structure, and within the immediate neighborhood, it would be the only 2-story. Exhibit 10 is a map provided by the applicant that shows 2-story structures in the vicinity but outside the applicant's immediate neighborhood. The second part of the proposal is a proposal to exceed the maximum floor area ratio. The reason the applicant is exceeding the maximum floor area ratio is due to some space on the 2nd story. On his plans on sheet A4, there are 2 areas marked as attic exempt area. However, pursuant to our town code for the definition of attic, because there are areas of that 2nd floor that are over 7 feet in height, everything down to 5 feet counts, and thus those 2 areas do count towards floor area ratio. This results in the applicant's need to request to exceed the floor area ratio. It also results in the largest home in the immediate neighborhood in terms of square footage and FAR. In terms of architecture, the current plans reflect the recommendations of the architectural consultant, but it still is the only 2-story in the immediate neighborhood. Staff recommends denial because it would be the only 2-story in the immediate neighborhood. It would be the largest in terms of square footage and floor area ratio, and that staff could not make the findings for the request to exceed the FAR. There is a desk item before you this evening. It does contain letters of support from surrounding neighborhoods. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of Ms. Savage? Commissioner Kane.
Why is the attic space designated on the applicant's plan? Why is that not being exempted?
It is not exempt because it's on the 2nd floor, where a portion of the 2nd floor at some point, and in many areas, is over 7 feet in height. Our town code says that if at any point the area is over 7 feet, everything down to 5 feet counts towards floor area.
And it is on the same level with the 2nd floor?
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Telesfor.
I just have a question, just as a reminder. Garages are usually 450? Is that what, this is 600?
Are you asking what a typical size for a 2-car garage?
Yes, 2-car garage.
For a 2-car garage, it would be 440.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Savage. We will now open the public portion of the public hearing and allow the applicant 5 minutes to address the commission. So I will now call Dmitry Lebedenko to the podium, and you will have 5 minutes to speak.
Good evening. Let me take a quick second to acknowledge and thank Planning Commission members who have been able to do a site visit and observe our story poles that outline our proposed residence. I would like to recap the work we have done to date in our efforts to be in compliance with the Planning Department's recommendations. On July 1st, 2014, our consulting architect has given the following recommendations.
Sir, can you bring the microphone with you? Thank you.
On this picture, you can see that the following feature was recommended to be removed. The eave of the roof was recommended to be lowered, and the first floor level was recommended to be lowered to the finished grade. In consideration of these comments, working with our architect, we modified our design to accommodate the feedback. Subsequent to making these changes, the consulting architect reviewed them and gave the following recommendations, specifically to change the design of the dormers to a shed configuration and to reconcile interior architecture with exterior massing. Upon completion of the second review, we modified our design in compliance with these secondary recommendations. And on this picture, you see the final recommendation from the consulting architect in our proposed design. We believe that our current design has benefited greatly from the feedback of the consulting architect, and as a result of this should be approved for the following reasons. Reason 1, it maintains the existing character and design of the neighborhood. As you can see on this map, there are plenty of two-story homes that are close by. Our proposed design preserves the architectural style of the neighborhood at large and is consistent with general plan recommendations. The predominant style in the neighborhood is ranch style with gable roofs. Asphalt shingle is being the common material for the roofs. Siding is being used as an exterior material. As you can see, this is property across from proposed site. There are a variety of roof shapes and pitches in a closed neighborhood. The third reason is that the height profile of the proposed construction matches adjacent homes. The first floor level is level with the grade. There is no step when you approach the house and enter the front door. The lower eave of the roof is also consistent with adjacent homes due to extension of the roof to match the roof eave line with the neighbors. We are proposing a house in a family-oriented neighborhood where children regularly play, and we consider this family friendliness to be the most important factor in the value of our neighborhood. So our new home should meet the needs of the area. We collected signatures from neighbors from immediate neighborhood as well as those who live on the street. We received comments like excited about the remodeling, looking forward to finished project, and everyone agreed this will improve the quality of the neighborhood. This is not just a comfortable house, it is going to be built using one of the most environmentally friendly methods using insulated concrete forms. I brought a sample here. ICFs are hollow foam blocks that are stacked in the shape of walls, reinforced with steel rebar and then filled with concrete. They provide superior structural quality and insulation that reduces the heating and cooling systems by 50%. This will be a comfortable house for a great family neighborhood. It will be both safe, environmentally friendly, and long-lasting. It will far exceed the existing general plan requirements in terms of environment and sustainability metrics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lebedenko. Do we have any questions for Mr. Lebedenko? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just have one question. Could you lift that sample and put it on the table? It's hard to see here. Is the outside material styrofoam?
Yes, it's a sandwich made out of two layers of styrofoam that provides the superior insulation. The steel rebars go in the center here, and then this is poured with concrete. So this can withstand.
What goes on the outside of the styrofoam?
Outside surface can accept either siding or stucco. The interior is covered.
You said you were going to have siding, I thought?
Correct.
And how is the siding adhered to the styrofoam?
There are certain points where you can attach to exterior layers to the plastic webbing, And there are certain points marked on the exterior here that have high degree of adhesion to the fasteners.
So assuming you had 2 stories, the 2 stories would be faced all the way around with styrofoam to which would be applied some form of siding.
On the exterior, the furthest on the exterior layer will be the siding. There will be also weatherization layer applied that prevents the moisture from penetrating the house.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Commissioner Hanssen?
I see that your petition states that the house is 2,500 square feet, but from the town's perspective, it's listed as over 3,000 square feet. And I'm just wondering if you considered any other alternate designs with your architect for a somewhat smaller house, because this is it's significantly above the code floor area ratio. Did you consider other designs or something a little bit smaller?
When choosing how to position the square footage, we placed as much as possible on the first floor while staying away from the drip line of the 300-year-old oak tree. We put a few rooms upstairs, trying to make the second floor look small. This shape was fitted best with a gable roof, which is common in the neighborhood, and therefore our choices were to reposition the square footage on the second floor or change the ceiling heights in order to satisfy requirements for the attic to be exempt. The reason we're asking for the space in the attic is that instead of vaulting the ceiling and heating up the space, wasting energy, we would rather ask for storage where we could place mechanical systems and items for long-term storage. The reason being is that if we vaulted the space, then instead we would have to allocate that storage somewhere else in the house and would reduce it. And I would argue that this size is average size for the family which has several kids.
So basically you're saying, no, you didn't consider a smaller design, but for the reasons that you stated.
Well, smaller in terms of living area?
Well,
overall?
For this house to be in compliance with the floor area ratio, it would have to be roughly 2,500 square feet, and it's stated in your application it's 3122.
Right.
So all I was asking is, did you consider any designs that actually made it 2,500?
We would like to have 2,500 square foot of living area, and with this design, we almost accidentally acquired extra 600 plus feet of attic space, which we thought would be exempt, but late in the application we found out that it cannot be exempt. Therefore, we started to think what to do about this and the reasons why we arrived at this solution. So alternatives to this would be, while keeping living area at 2,500 square feet for a comfortable house, we can change the layout of the attics so it wouldn't be a floor area. So, say vaulting of the space would be one proposal. Second would be to turn the rooms 90 degrees so that they stretch along the house axle. This would reduce the space for the attic. Looking at that, I concluded that the size of the windows in the bedrooms upstairs would be reduced, and the windows will be very high in the air, very high above the floor. So currently, all the bedrooms upstairs have regular size windows, so that they receive plenty of natural light. Something that just occurred to me that our ceiling height in those bedrooms is between 7 and 10 feet because we were planning to vault the bedrooms to match the roof line. But if we limited that to below 7 feet and these are going to be kids' bedrooms, then maybe the attic that we claim to be exempt does become exempt. The policy would apply in that case. But in that case, the ceiling will be at 7 feet in the bedrooms. Another possibility.
Any further questions? Commissioner Erekson.
I guess I'd like to follow up. If I'm, and I want to be sure I'm getting what you're doing correct, because I have the same basic question that Commissioner Hanssen had. So if I understand correctly, you're trying to achieve 2,500 square feet of space on the first and second floor.
Correct.
So you chose a house, because you're going to tear the existing house down, correct?
Yes.
So you're starting over from scratch. So you chose to have, you chose a house design which has approximately 1,698 on the first floor and 802 on the second floor to achieve your 2,500. You could have chosen a different ratio between the two floors, and you chose a house design which added another 650 roughly square feet on the second floor of countable space.
Right.
And then you also are planning on a basement area that's 1,700 square feet, which will be with 9-foot ceilings, as I understand. So clearly is occupiable space. So while it doesn't count, while it doesn't count toward the standards, I'm talking about what you're really achieving. So if my math is correctly, you're achieving a house with something like 4,200 square feet of occupiable space, the town standards aside for the moment. I don't believe that there are very many other houses in the neighborhood that have basement space.
Correct.
So you're placing what would appear to me to be a really large, out of proportion house in a neighborhood where the typical large house before it's remodeled is about 1,500 square feet in that whole area.
In the immediate neighborhood, which would be a house across the street.
Right, in the immediate neighborhood, and that's what the town standards
Yes.
call for us to. But even if I go beyond, and if I define the whole neighborhood as what I can enter onto that, there are not very many, if any, 4,200 square foot houses in that area. So it seems to me that it would be, so I'm trying to help, you need to help me understand how it's compatible with that neighborhood, even whether you define it as the immediate neighborhood that we're obligated to evaluate the house from, or even if you expand it. Because when I drove the whole area, I even went outside the boundaries, and it seems to me that this is a house, a size of a home which would be more appropriate in a different neighborhood in Los Gatos, but I want you to help me understand.
Let me explain our thinking about the basement first. When we did the soils test, it was determined that our foundation has to have really deep footings, which would be about 5 to 6 feet. When we asked how much extra work it would be to make it a basement, we were told that it's probably going to be a reasonably small amount that we can afford. Then we assumed that if we have to satisfy the engineer's requirements for the foundation, we might as well invest in the basement. At this point, I have estimates from 3 different parties. One is being engineer, others are being builders. And while builders are promising this to be affordable, engineers indicate that this basement might cost as much as the whole structure above the ground. So at this point, that we don't have official engineering estimates, we would like to request the basement because our foundation will excavate so much soil, maybe it will, maybe will not. But if engineers determine that this will be cost prohibitive, then we will just go with the regular foundation and we will be left with the 2,500 square feet of living space on the first and second floor. Going beyond the immediate neighborhood, there are several houses that are larger than 2,500 square feet, and I'm considering area of about 900-foot circle from our property. I prepared pictures of two-story homes in the area, and I can show it. I have a booklet, and you have photographs as well.
Any further questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Lebedenko. You may sit down now. We will now invite comments from members of the public. So I will be calling Neil Grenzenbach to the podium. You will have 3 minutes to speak. When you see a yellow light, you'll have 30 seconds left. Red, it's expired.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. I'm Neil Grenzbach. I'm the next door neighbor to the north. I have a two-car garage, but we don't have to need any extra parking, so I'm all set for parking. That's a joke, okay. Anyway, I'm here representing myself and Bill Ross, who couldn't make it. He's the neighbor to the rear. And you mentioned the large imprint on a reasonably small lot. The other factor that may not be obvious is that their lot is 2 feet higher in elevation than mine and Bill's. So everything that goes up is emphasized more by 2 feet. The other factor is that I'm looking at the plans, and the lady here worked out the math, is that the first floor has 10-foot ceilings. I've got 7 foot 10 inches on my ceiling. So if the ceiling was lowered in the first floor, the imprint would be, as far as skyline, would be reduced. The other factor that Bill and I had was the drainage, with all the digging of what was already been mentioned. How's it going to be drained? And the third item is that we have a giant oak tree back there that probably was there when De Anza rode through from New Spain. And I can't imagine, over the decades it's been trimmed a little bit, but the water line, the drip line, is probably not fair to the tree, because the tree's been downsized with the roots. So I would imagine the roots are going to be cut up to some extent by any digging. More pursuant to my needs on the north side is that there's a window in the second floor that the owner and I have discussed, and as my understanding, it was going to be about 5 or 5.5 feet from the floor, narrower, like 15 inches, and 6 feet wide, which is what I have in my property, and he can look at it. But based on the math that the young lady did, it's going to be 3.5 feet off the floor and 4 feet wide, and it was also supposed to be opaque, kind of like a bathroom window, so you couldn't look down into my yard, and that's not mentioned either. So the window's been changed from what I was promised to what's there. Now, I don't know if that's going to be finalized or not, but that's basically our concerns. So I'm through. Any questions?
Any questions, Commissioners? Commissioner Talasfor.
I just wanted to be clear about the window that you were referring to. You said tonight, you said it was supposed to be up high, but tonight, the young, probably staff.
Yes, the young lady here did the math with the ruler, saying, well, it appears to be about 3.5 feet from the floor.
Instead of the 5 that
Right.
you thought it was going to be.
So it's higher and shorter. I've got a window right next door that's about this high and about 6 feet wide. It's only about, that's a lot of light.
You need to talk to the
Sorry.
microphone.
Anyway, it's higher, narrower, and wider for light.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Any further questions? Seeing none, you may sit down. Thank you. We will now allow the applicant to come back up to the podium for 3 minutes to add any additional comments about the application.
First, I would like to address the ceiling height. In response to consulting architects' suggestions, we lowered the house by 3.5 feet by adjusting the ceiling heights between the first and second floor in such a way that one would still be able to walk up the stairs to the second floor. And we lowered the roof pitch If we change any of those parameters, then all others have to change, and in most of the cases, the overall height of the house would be taller. I can address the window next. It probably is a change due to the roof shape with a snub corner being removed. We're prepared to either remove the window, position it differently, resize it, and it's definitely going to be opaque glass, so you will not be able to look through it. The oak will definitely be impacted by the construction. By estimate of the arborist, about 25% of 25% of the root system will be impacted, and they consider 30% being critical, and 25% is something that can be mitigated. Essentially, the arborist, as I understand, will have to be present during excavation to observe how the roots are being treated. Drainage is being planned in front of the property. There will be retaining pits for the water that runs off of the roof to be accumulated on the property instead of going into the street. And the 2-foot difference, we did a survey in 2013, and I requested the surveyor to calculate the difference in the floor height between our house and the property in the back of us, and they determined that the difference between the floors was 1 foot, but there is a definite jump near the fence, which makes it look like there is a difference of 2 feet. I admit we're higher by a foot, our property, than the neighbors are. I think I commented on all the issues raised.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, you may sit down. And we will now close the public portion of the public hearing and ask the commissioners if they have questions, comments, or a motion. Commissioner O'Donnell.
My comment would be that when you go out there and drive the neighborhood, that is a fairly large street without a single double story house on it. This would be the first, and I'm sure it would open, it would not be the last. I hate to see that well, one, we're not supposed to do that, and two, I would hate to see it happen. So I could not support this. And then as far as the FAR is concerned, and as far as the ceiling height of the 600 square foot attic, all that, the attic I think could be easily remedied. I'm surprised that it hasn't been easily remedied, but it wouldn't make any difference to me because I don't think, I could not support a 2-story house there.
Commissioner Hanssen.
After seeing all the comments from the neighbors, I wasn't as concerned about the aspect of the 2 stories, but it seemed to me in driving through the neighborhood and looking at the plans that this house is just too big for the lot. And I think that the architect can do better and come up with a design that comes within the floor area ratio and is truly a 2,500 square foot house that'll have less impact. And depending on how that might happen, maybe the 2-story thing would even look better as well. But I can't support this either. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanssen. Commissioner Kane.
As I mentioned earlier, I was treated to a walking tour of the neighborhood. I'm trying to think, Commissioner O'Donnell. I saw one 2-story house. There's a fairly new house down on the corner of El Cajon and Cut-Through Street. That's just enormous house and doesn't fit with the rest of the neighborhood. I mean, that's a shining example of what the residential guidelines talk about when they talk about maintaining the character of the neighborhood. We have an example of one that doesn't seem to do that. These houses were built in the applicant's floor plan is shared by other houses that I looked at, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath. And I was shown houses that have been remodeled and upgraded, and they're 1-story house. So there's alternatives to a 2-story house in this neighborhood. Other neighbors have explored those alternatives. But if it needs to be said, for those of you who saw it, that tree is extraordinary. I think the arborist report said 300 years. It's, 52 inches in diameter. I'm not going to support anything that does anything to those roots. So that's a sticky wicket. But it is an extraordinary tree. And what did we talk about? Heritage trees? Is this one of those? If it isn't, it should be. Fix that. So I feel similar to other commissioners. This is a case where staff has given advice consistent with the residential design guidelines, and it would appear that advice has not been followed.
Thank you. Any further comments? Commissioner O'Donnell.
With reference to the 2-story, the one thing I would say is, over a long period of time, I have watched what happens in neighborhoods when you put a 2-story in. And I've seen neighborhoods totally change. So it is true, I guess, if you really try, you might say, well, we could do a 2-story, we could do this, we could do that. But my experience has been, once you let a 2-story into what otherwise is a 1-story neighborhood, it does not stop. And so what I understand our role to be is we look at the defined neighborhood, and clearly the defined neighborhood are single stories. So I only make that point because I think we all kind of agree it's too big for the lot. I certainly am concerned about that oak tree too, but I just throw out for consideration, perhaps in other matters, that you make one change on a 2-story in a neighborhood, and I can almost guarantee to you that in 10 years, you will have a number of 2-stories houses. So I just want to suggest that everybody, most of us have seen that happen, and I just call it to your attention.
Commissioner Kane.
I'd like to point out, the definition of immediate neighborhood. Years ago, 6-7 years ago, Mr. Paulson, myself, the Director of Community Development, Ms. Talasfore, toured sections of the town with the town architect, Larry Cannon. And Larry stood in front of one house and looked across the street. And I believe it was me who said, 225, Larry. And he went, yeah, that's right. So the immediate neighborhood definition found on page 11 of the residential design guidelines without a credit or footnote, it's a terrible thing, is 225, meaning if you stand in front of the subject house, it's 2 houses to your left, 2 houses to your right, and the corresponding 5 houses across the street. And I applied 225 today, as other commissioners did, and all of those houses are small houses, 1-story, 1959 Kirka, maybe one exception, one's been modernized. But that's the immediate neighborhood, and that's what I'd like to preserve and find a way to communicate that to the applicant to get something similar to what other people have done when they've upgraded their homes.
Thank you. Commissioner Talasfore?
Yeah, I will be really, I cannot support this either. I would say to stay within the FAR and to, if you were so inclined to think about a redesign, that you really, it would have to be pretty special. It would have to really be in keeping. I would avoid long ridge beams and a lot of windows with I would try to simplify what you're doing if you redo this. But I couldn't support this square footage in this house, in this neighborhood. So,
Commissioner Kane?
I'd like to make a motion to support the staff recommendation and deny Architecture and Site Application S14036. I cannot make the findings, and it is in a number of very important points in conflict with the residential design guidelines.
Do we? Seconded by Commissioner O'Donnell. Any further discussion? Are we ready for a vote? All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Mr. Paulson, are there appeal rights of the actions of the commission on this?
There are appeal rights. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal the decision to the Town Council. Forms are available in the clerk's office. There's a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
Thank you. Mr. Paulson, do we have a report from the Director of Community Matters tonight?
Just a very brief one. Last week, the Town Council met, and the one substantive land use item that they considered was the North 40 specific plan. Due to the lateness of the hour, they just had some additional questions for staff, which we are researching for them, and then they set a special meeting for April 14th to continue their deliberations on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. Do any members of the commission have any issue to bring forth to the attention of the commission? Commissioner Kane.
I'd like to thank the acting chair for a very pleasant meeting.
Thank you. I'm flattered and I'm honored. Thank you. And thank you for the backup and support from all of you. This meeting's adjourned.